Hi everybody, welcome to Edonics. This is Kaushik, your instructor for the Spring Framework training. Today we'll be talking more on the practical side of AOP implementation. In our previous section, we have already discussed the concepts of AOP, how it works, what are the core concepts, what are the features that needs to be implemented. So today let's jump into the code and have a look how we can implement AOP. So, for example, first I will define what are the components that we have written to implement AOP. So, let's talk about the files first. For example, this is the file where which is known as log aop.java file. Here we have defined all the type of advices. This is before advice, this is after advice, this is around advice, this is after returning advice, and this is after exception advice. So in theoretically we have discussed all these type of advices. So this is the file where I have written all the codes, all the advice codes, and the code that needs to be executed. As we have discussed, like on in AOP, this is the particular piece of code that needs to be executed. So this is the advice before, after, and everything, and this is the type of code which you want to be executed. This could be a logging code, this could be a auditing code, this could be a security code, this could be exception management code. If there is an exception, this particular code would be executed. So whatever you want to implement programmatically, whatever advice or whatever code you want to execute as an advice, that has to be put inside these methods. These are all the method types, and you need to understand that these methods has to be implemented to implement AOP effectively. Now let's look at the other components, other Java files that we have. This is a simple employee Java file where it's a kind of POJO file where we have some parameters like employee name, employee ID, employee address, employee salary, and then some setter and getter methods just to get those values and put those values at get employee ID, set employee ID, employee address, and all those things. In here, we have just commented a piece of code which we will be checking when we check the exception type of advice, after exception advice that we have already mentioned here, the last one, this one. So this is the particular type of code which we will just uncomment to test that particular type of advice. Now the other Java files are, this is the main Java file where we will get this particular bin by using application context. This is our bin XML file. We will take a reference of employee bin and then we will call a get employee name method. And we have introduced another method, get employee ID, and we have just commented out this section to understand how it works at a later point of programming. Now the most important file is this bin file. You need to understand this configuration file very efficiently, very effectively to implement AOP. See in this file, this is the AOP configuration area. These are the two aspects that we have defined. I have commented this purposefully and we will just uncomment it at a later point of time to check some other methods. This is the bin definition, employee bin, where we are putting the values of name, employee ID, employee address from the configuration file itself. This is the bin definition for the log AOP aspect, right? So this is the structure of the XML file. This is the basic part, as you know. This is the aspect part, as you have defined. And lastly, we have the bin parts. You can have many more bins here if you want to implement some other part. So these are the folder structure. If you check the folder structure, we have typically three Java files: employee.java, logaop.java, main.java. And on the web content, we have this AOP bin.xml file. All right. And on the dependency side, this is another important point which you need to understand. What are the dependency factors that we have? We have all the resources here. We have all the dependency files here, where we need to depend what files we want to implement. You can check the dependency files, all the dependencies of this program under this libraries folder. You can just check what files we have implemented. Just have a look. All the files are related to aspects. So if you want to implement aspect-oriented programming, you need these jar files to implement it, because these jar files have the support for different components like this aspect weaver.jar, the aspect jrt, aspect j, and the different versions of files are there. And the other files are typically related to Spring application, Spring core. And these files are very common to all Spring applications. So only you need to check whether you have the specific jar files related to aspect-oriented programming or to support the AOP implementation by Spring Framework. So this is the program structure. You can simply create a web application and then create files and then create one XML-based configuration to implement aspects. Now let's check what we are trying to achieve in this program. We are trying to call different type of aspects after the execution of this particular method getEmpName. Now here the method is there, getEmpName. This is the method based on which we are implementing different aspects, like what we want to do, what we want to achieve. So this could be done on other methods as well. For example, if you check this particular piece of code, we have defined another aspect with a different aspect ID, and we have selected a different method getEmpID, and we have implemented two advices here. One is before advice and after advice. So you can have number of other methods as well, where you want to just implement the aspect, where you want to execute the aspects. And similarly, you need to create the advice files here, you need to add the methods here, and you need to call those methods from this particular main application. This is just for testing the applications, how it works. So let's have a look at what are the components that we have defined, the core concepts. Just see, this is the aspect ID log. This is the reference. What does this refer? It refers to this particular AOP code, AOP class, log AOP. This is the reference ID which we have mentioned here to bind this particular aspect with this particular method. So this is the binding part. You need to have a separate ID for this. Just here in this aspect, we have used log1 as the aspect ID, but we are referring the same aspect file, the log AOP. This is the bin ID which you are referring. Now in the next point, as you have discussed, the point cut. This is very important. This is the point cut. What is the point cut? Just see, the reference is point cut. Point cut ref is select all. Method is before advice. That means this particular method will be executed before executing this particular getEmployee method. That's the point cut. So we are defining a point cut where a particular advice will be executed. Rather, the code within the advice will be executed before we call the method. So this is the plugging point of an advice on top of a method. Now this particular method has a code. Let's check what is there before advice. Now in this before advice, we have just put a sys.out just to see whether it works or not. Now on the next section, what we have is like after advice, around advice, after returning advice, after exception advice, all these methods. So these particular methods are very important to execute at different point of time. For example, if we just uncomment this particular line of code, then this particular after advice method will be executed after execution of this particular method. Similarly, the around advice method, similarly after returning advice method, similarly after exception advice method. So this is the controlling point from where we are configurally, or as a configuration, we are pointing the location, the target method, this is the target method, and what type of advices will be executed before this method, after this method. And all these methods should be defined within this particular file. This is the before advice, after advice, around advice, or anything that you can see, or you can also write your custom advice methods here and add this particular custom advice method here. But there are some other couple of steps to make the Spring framework understand what is the type of method and how it works, or that should work or not. You can define any number of methods, any number of advices, or you can just mention any number of beans to be implemented. This is just simple a log AOP bean, just for understanding the log. You can have similar type of beans for auditing, similar type of bean definition for security, similar type of bean definition for exception handling, data validation, or whatever you want. And those particular code should be implemented here, and additional methods should be implemented here. Yet what particular method is the target method? As you have defined, this is the target method, this is the target method which you want to keep under the advice, under the implementation of AOP. And there are the other methods as well. You can just include these methods as well in this particular bin configuration file. And then again impose, or again just apply different kind of advices on top of this method. What you need to do, you just need to add another section here similarly, and you need to just change this particular ID, and you just need to change this particular method name. For example, if you have an employee ID, if you have a for example get employee address, you can just add this particular method here, get employee address, and this is under AOP implementation. Now this is another aspect we are adding on top of this particular method. So when this particular method will be executed, before that this advice will be executed, before that, after that this advice will be executed. You can just keep on adding any number of aspects with a different aspect ID and refer any number of methods or the concerns or the advices to implement on this particular type of method. So this is the core of AOP implementation, how it works, what are the configuration files, and how it should be implemented programmatically. Once you run this program, you can check how it is working, what are the values that is coming, and how it should be addressed programmatically. So there is another option where you can just implement this particular method just as an annotation on top of this particular thing. You can just write an annotation here. Similarly, like before advice annotation at before advice, or after advice, or anything. That's the annotation based method. And this particular scenario, you just need to implement aspect-j, and you don't need any kind of XML file as you have defined here. That's a more efficient way of programming, where you are not using any XML based configuration. And who are more comfortable with configuration based XML based configuration, they can go with this particular type of file and implement AOP directly. So this is the basic structure, basic Java files. This is the XML files to implement AOP, and you can also have the kind of, for example, the aspect-j implementation, the code to implement the similar type of aspects with annotations rather than AOP bin example. In our next section, we will be trying to check what is the output of